What's up, guys? I just finished watching the entire first season of Marvel's Wonder Man, and this is episode 1 of Checkin the Gate. This podcast is all about television, film, the movie industry, and my journey as an actor. So I wanted to start off with what better than a television show about a superhero who is also an actor. It couldn't have wrote itself even better. So without further ado, let's get into Marvel's Wonder Man. So this show is a Marvel Spotlight, which is a self-contained, not meant to be connected to any other stories, also kind of an afterthought and shoved under the rug so far. We've had Marvel's Echo as the last Spotlight, which nobody even remembers really at this point, but it has an ominous start, to say the least, to begin with. But I'm a huge fan of it, so I'll give you some spoiler-free breakdown of what's going on with the show. The show is originally about a comic book character named Simon Williams, which debuted in the 1970s. This guy was an actor. The original comic book character was a white guy. For this show, they switched the white comic book character, who was more of an action star, into a more nuanced black character who is more of a method actor and someone who's more classically trained. I think they did a good job overall, but I'm very curious to see what the general reception is going to be to having the race switched for this character. Because as we know, especially when it comes to fandom, a lot of the fans can be toxic and will push back on any sort of changes. That being said, I thought they did an amazing job. It spoke to me as an actor. It spoke to me as a comic book fan, and it spoke to me as an African American. I think that they brought a lot of nuance, and I think that there was a very clear and firm and responsible hand guiding all of the decisions all throughout the series. So I'm happy with it. Again, I think that with the end result being trying to create a superhero that exists in the MCU universe as a movie star superhero of themselves, I think that they did it in a very ingenious way. And I have some nitpicks, but I'm very pleased and very pleasantly surprised by what they were able to accomplish. So this is your spoiler alert. If you haven't watched season 1 of Wonder Man, go do it now. It's on Disney Plus. I'm sure if you really want to, you could find it on some other less slavery outlets, but this is your spoiler warning. You're an adult. If you listen beyond this, do not at me. This is on you. So without further ado, we're going to go into my general thoughts and talk about some of the key points from the episodes that really resonated with me. So 3, 2, 1, and boom. The biggest thing that this series did that Marvel has been struggling to do, in my opinion, was have a storyline and have trailers that didn't give away the entire story. By the end of episode 1, we find out that the second lead of the television series, which is Trevor Slattery, who's played by Ben Kingsley, is actually someone who is a double agent and has been working under duress for the Department of Damage Control. I didn't see this coming. Maybe you guys did. All the stuff that I've seen online, nobody was even insinuating that there was a possibility that perhaps Trevor might be in cahoots with the Department of Damage Control. But the whole idea of having him as a double agent and watching his story arc as he's conflicted, as he grows closer with our protagonist, Simon Williams, played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen. I thought it was brilliant the way that the two of these guys were able to portray their characters, but also the way that their characters were written and the arcs that they were going on. And so I didn't see it coming. it was a complete and utter shock by the end of episode 1. Then they don't hide it. There's no buildup. They're letting you know from the gate. He picks up the phone at the end of the episode and he's talking to damage control and he says, okay, contact has been made. So he was embedded the whole time, which was like, boom. Super cool from a television standpoint and from a comic book standpoint. From a acting standpoint, from a film standpoint, the protagonist, Simon Williams, who's the person who's going to become Wonder Man, we are introduced to him from the beginning, not as a struggling actor, but as someone who's had some level of success. And I think that the tone for him is someone that is clearly identified as talented and has had opportunities, but he is his own biggest obstacle. It makes me think of the phrase, would you rather be right or would you rather be happy? Because as we're introduced to our character, it is on set for American Horror Story, which again is interesting throughout the series. We'll see that Disney is name dropping other existing television series, both in their network of shows, as well as shows that exist outside of the Disney umbrella. So American Horror Story, which exists on Fox, which is under the general Disney umbrella, is the show that this guy's on. He's a day player. And immediately we are introduced to some subtle hierarchy, which as an actor, as someone who's been on many sets, I'm very familiar with being put into my place and being told repeatedly what I can have access to, what is meant for me and what isn't meant for me. And we see him being introduced into a world where he now has some status. He has his own trailer, but he doesn't have access to a golf cart to escort him from his trailer to the set. He has to walk, and he's told that the golf carts are not for day players. So automatically we're getting, I think, more technical than a lot of television shows get into, and it's something that I think is very important for his character and for giving the authenticity of specifically where he's at and some of the frustrations that he is constantly hitting. He then goes onto set, is about to shoot, but decides right before they are going to start rolling to start giving notes to the director. And he gives not one, but several notes, which are met with more and more disdain. The first one was kind of welcome. By the third note, they're just like, this guy's doing too much. And by the time he gives his like fourth or fifth note, the showrunner has decided that he is not worth the time. And before even shooting one scene, they wrap him out and he has been cut off the show. His character is no longer going to appear. His big break is done just like that. Why? Because he's a perfectionist and because he is trying to get a hold of a character and add levels and subtext to something that nobody's asking him to do. As an actor, as someone in the film industry, I completely understand this. I get that we want to provide some backstory, some context, have ethos for what we're doing with the character. I also understand that not everybody cares about that. Sometimes the creatives do, but a lot of times the showrunners and the bigger picture people are not concerned with what we think is essential. And I think the quintessential example of this is someone like Shia LaBeouf. Have you ever seen the documentary about Megapolis called Megadoc? You will see the way that he butts heads with Francis Ford Coppola is a prime example of somebody who is driven by their need to understand their character versus the director's goal of establishing a greater tapestry and having a film run well and on time. So even if you're not an actor, I thought this was particularly poignant. And this is all happening in the first 10 minutes of the film, because I think we've all experienced a time or two where we've been put into our place after trying to give helpful and constructive advice, criticisms, thoughts on a situation, whether that's in your personal life, whether that's in your professional life. There's been times, I'm sure, where you have given something with all of the best intentions and it was received with nothing but a blank stare, or perhaps somebody who actively is going to now root against you because they felt like your information was unsolicited and did not help them get to where they perceived you trying to go. So this is what we're seeing. And this is, I think, again, very poignant and very relevant for actors, but even more relevant for African Americans and for African American males. I think that the entire arc of the story deals with a lot of mental health issues and not having the proper outlet for expressing yourself or dealing with some of the traumas and frustrations that are experienced on a daily basis. And that's done through the lens of being an African American man. But there are a lot more people that experience those things as well. It's not something that's limited to that. And I also think one of the beautiful things about the show, despite having arcs, as I've just described, that are specific to, I think, an African American character, there are a ton of times where the fact that Simon is Black is completely irrelevant to the progression of the story. It is something that is not directly mentioned at a bunch of times, and it's never really something that is explicitly made a focal point. But again, because I think that they had people who were trying to do something with a soft touch, were able to very expertly throw stuff in there that I think speaks to that experience. In the second episode, which is called Self Tape, which is super triggering for anybody that is an actor in 2026 and isn't offer only, isn't on that Denzel level, you probably have to do self tapes regularly. This week, I've had to do 3 self tapes. 2 of those I got off Actors Access. 1 of those I got off of social media. But I usually do between 2 and 5 a week. It depends on what's available, who hits me back, what roles I'm seeing. So I think that's just an insight for me and where I'm at, which is admittedly not, super established, but, I'm on my way. So I can imagine people who are further along, not only having more, but also, even if they don't have as many, having a lot more stress put into being able to deliver a specific tape or performance because of the amount that rides on it and the stakes for whatever character or opportunity are at hand. But despite that, there are still universal frustrations that we experience as actors as it pertains to self-tape. They do an uncomfortable job of explaining those things, whether that is finding your lighting, whether that is trying to find the right place, whether that is finding the right person to read off camera for you. If you're not an actor, you probably don't understand how frustrating and how difficult it is when you're auditioning. 70 to 80% of these roles are going to ask you to do a scene which has at least one other person in it. Oftentimes there'll be 2 or 3, depending on what it is. You can, and we see our protagonist, Simon Williams, record himself doing the other lines and then trying to time himself being able to play against his own recording, which I've tried to do famously. The guy from Snowfall, he was able to do that and land the role of Franklin Saint. And he recorded as himself in his British accent off camera. And then when he was doing the Franklin Saint, put on this American accent. So there's really quite a big difference. And you even hear Yaya in this, or Simon, Yaya as Simon, do a different voice as he's pretending to read off camera. And he can't get the right timing. He's coming in on top of his own lines in the recording. he goes to a studio. The studio requires, there's a whole bunch of things that happen which are just emblematic of what it is to tape in 2026. And he eventually ends up going with Trevor, who is a double agent, to Joey Pants's house. And the best line of the series, I thought, was him being in Joey Pants's house, him geeking out by the fact that he is at, this actor's house, eating some duck prosciutto, and then excusing himself to the bathroom to talk to his agent. And he calls his agent, who's played by Ex Mayo, who is an African-American actress. And he calls her and he's like, yeah, I'm at Joey Pants's house. And he's geeking out by everything that he is experiencing. And then he says, yeah, I'm code switching and everything. And just the recognition that he would be in an environment where he would have to code switch, and him wanting to relate that to another person of color, that he is doing that. And it is in such a specific situation where he felt like he couldn't be himself, even more so that he had to be able to be super prim and proper in order to maintain a potential relationship with this movie star. But then also being excited to explain and to give a reference point to how important and how promising the opportunity was by saying that. And that line is a throwaway line. And if you're not familiar, it's referencing code switching as being someone, or being able to go between two forms of yourself depending on what your situation is. Oftentimes in a more professional manner, being more buttoned up and having to speak more proper, having to articulate yourselves in ways that you wouldn't if you were more relaxed and more in the company that you feel that you can be yourself around. And so because he doesn't feel that, he is code switching. But that is really the arc of his entire character, because as we find out in a later episode, he hasn't had anybody before Trevor is able to, wiggle his way into his house and into his life, that he's been able to share his true self with, which is not only a superpowered person who has some level of anger in him, but also is someone that can't get out of his own way and overthink things, and is more complex than he's been allowed to be throughout the arc of his life. And so in this same episode at his mother's house, the next episode, we also get to see him use his powers. We don't see explicit power use really until like the third episode, which is also interesting for a superhero movie or a superhero property. But I thought it was super well done. I'm a huge fan of Marvel when they try to go genre. I loved WandaVision. I think that superhero content is so pervasive now that it's not, oh, you're going to see a Marvel, which people will say. It's about going to see the next film in a franchise, and the franchise has to differentiate the films by trying to do innovative things and trying to build. In the same way that Andor is a spy thriller, even though it's still a Star Wars, you need to have more variation in the content that is being produced. And this project, even though it is a superhero property, even though it is about a superhero and about a man trying to be a superhero, it's about an actor. It's about a man trying to become his best self, which is a very universal arc, and I appreciate it. And because of that, you can do such deep dives into the character and into building of the personalities, and it allows the actors to do very good character work and to make very specific choices, and to have their choices have the added meta text of a choice that they're making, but a choice that they're trying to show you that their character is making, because their character is someone who makes choices for a living, is is fascinating, and having to telegraph that level of intention behind every delivery of a line or every movement that you do, because you're not quite sure. It can get lost when it's the actor doing it versus when it's the actor being the character acting doing it. But I thought it was dope, and you don't need to have the big fight sequences and all these things. And really, as I mentioned, the biggest bad of the entire series is Simon trying to get over his own issues in his own self. But also it's damage control and the Mandarin. But super cool. And we find out that part of the reason why all of these things are even relevant to Simon, and why the set of actions that has unfolded is happening, is because of a superpowered person named Doorman, who was a doorman at a club some years ago, who then became part of Jay Gad's entourage. And he then got superpowers, and he is able to operate very similar to Spot. If you ever seen Across the Spider-Verse, the character that has all the holes in him and can kind of go into different locations and dimensions by, enveloping himself. The doorman has the ability to turn his chest into a portal where he and other people can, enter and exit through. And we find out, they tell this person's story all in one episode, and it's done in black and white. It's done as kind of like a noir type vibe, but also it's played very straight, and it works, and it's funny, and it's cool. And we find out that he was a doorman that was happy and content, and then was kind of pushed into going to bigger and better things. And then after he becomes part of the entourage, he ends up being in a movie, and then they end up using his superpower in the movie, and he becomes this viral sensation where everybody in America knows him, and he gets a catchphrase, which is ding dong, ding dong, motherfucker. And he kind of, has his 15 minutes of fame, and is doing every iteration of what we've seen pop culture do with somebody like the Hop to a Girl, essentially, who is everywhere for, a period of time. I mean, he has a power, and he ends up kind of fizzling out. And then after, some time, I'm not exactly sure how much time has passed, he is asked to come back for a sequel to the movie that made him a household name. And he agrees, and it's him playing against Josh Gad in this movie. And Josh Gad is playing Josh Gad, who is of Frozen / Olaf fame, which is another example of Disney using their properties and integrating in synergy. But also, like, Josh Gad is very clearly poking fun at himself, and isn't explicitly drugged out, but he's definitely someone that is on one throughout the course of his portrayal of himself in this movie, where they say, yeah, Olaf was crowd surfing. So it's interesting to see Disney have sort of this relationship with their properties, especially in a movie that is not explicitly, about family stuff. But anyway, long story short, in the second movie that the Doorman is in, Josh Gad, in the middle of a filming of a scene, goes through him and then gets trapped inside of him. And in the MCU, as of now, it is canon that Josh Gad is a missing person and has disappeared, and nobody knows where he is. And he is somehow, somewhere in one of the portals inside of the Doorman. And as a result of this, superhuman people are being regulated very strictly when it comes to their ability to perform on camera in scripted and in film and television, largely because of, it seems like, insurance premiums, and the risk involved more so than like any necessarily legal um, president saying that they can't. But this whole thing is, they do this episode, this vignette, essentially to establish kind of what is going through Simon's mind and how he's perceiving his superhuman abilities as a potential liability and as something that he can't share with anybody because it has direct ability to impede for his ultimate goal of becoming a successful actor, which is, we all have our secrets and our crosses to bear. And so to have his be a superhero or a superpower is interesting, but without the episode about the doorman, I don't think that it would hit home quite as much why it is that way. So super interesting. I was a big fan of the choices that they made to do that. So we see all these things. Eventually, he's able to get the role, and Ben Kingsley as Trevor is his sidekick Barnaby. And then we see that there is a parallel arc going on between the character of Wonder Man and Barnaby, who are the two main characters of the movie that Simon and Trevor Slattery have been cast as. And in the movie, Barnaby betrays Wonder Man. And in the TV show that we're watching, Simon is betrayed by Trevor, who is, again, a double agent from Damage Control. And so it all comes to a head, and we find out that, or Simon finds out that Trevor has cut a deal and has been essentially informing on him, and he's been betrayed by his best friend, the only person that he's allowed to get close to him in his life, other than his former girlfriend, who's played by Olivia Thirlby. If you have seen The Whackness and you are a fan, and you are a real one, because she was dope in that, and that is a dope movie. And sometimes our biggest problem is that we only think about The Whackness. But for sure, and also her character in the show, in this penultimate episode, mentions that she is booked on Severance. So that is Disney talking about a non-Disney property in their show, which is even more interesting than the synergies that they had before with Horror Story and Frozen. But anyway, all this comes to a head after an interview that a journalist is doing about Trevor and Simon, and then the betrayal that Trevor and Simon have, which again is reflected in the betrayal that their characters Barnaby and Wonder Man have, comes to a head as Simon bursts into his trailer and tries to confront him. And at this very moment, behind Simon, we can see none other than a poster for Planet of the Apes, which, if we remember from Shang-Chi, is the movie that made Trevor Slattery want to go into acting. So I thought that was a nice little nod at what is arguably the climax of the film, having that Easter egg. Simon storms out, and it is all just too much, and he erupts, and he essentially blows up a sound stage with his power. Because if you don't have anybody to talk to, if your day one just betrayed you, sometimes you're gonna blow up, you're gonna crash out, and Simon crashes out, and that crash out is bad. And so it's interesting to see again how this message, but it's cool. But in his redemption arc, Trevor Slattery tries to redeem himself by taking responsibility for the explosion, and he reprises his role as the Mandarin. which is also very great. I think that as an actor, Ben Kingsley has an uncanny ability to portray himself as innocent and what's the word I want to say? Like jovial, but not even jovial. He just has the look of like a child on him where he's just unbothered by the world. And he is able to portray that as though he just is not worn down by the bullshit that all of us have to deal with on a daily basis. And he just lives a very charmed life. And he does a great job, not only in this, but in other movies of, existing in a world where he's just very carefree. And so to have him be the Mandarin and to reprise the role as the bad guy and putting on the voice, I wish I could do the voice, because even with his accent, the contrast of him being this carefree, innocent guy with long hair and a British accent to being this like rough and tough bearded gentleman, the Mandarin. It's good, but to see him do that role again, and throughout the series, we see him referred to by people as the Mandarin, which makes sense because this is the first time that we're seeing him in the United States since the events of Iron Man, where he was revealed to be the Mandarin. So it was cool to see him reprise that role again, and they had been seeding it throughout. But Damage Control is frustrated by the fact that he does this, but for their own reasons is willing to take him as the big bad and just count it as a win instead of trying to pursue Simon Williams. The movie goes on. Barnaby is recasted from Trevor Slattery to, you guessed it, Joey Pants. The movie goes on to be a big success, and we end up getting a successful Simon Williams in the MCU who has this huge movie called Wonder Man, and he's able to exist in a space similar to Christopher Reeves and Superman, where even though he is not Wonder Man, the general public sees him and views him as Wonder Man, understanding that it is still a character that he portrays, but it's such an iconic character that he is just synonymous and is referred to as Wonder Man, which I think ultimately is the goal and is in the same space that the comic book character existed in. And so now we have someone that is able to masquerade as a superhero with superpowers, but is kind of known as a superhero, but not. But it's all just kind of interesting. And again, it's even more meta with his superpowers and whether or not, if they choose to revisit Simon Williams as an actor with the whole context of him actually having superpowers being some sort of violation of this Doorman Act or the clause. And then also they have in this universe Rogers the musical, the motion picture. So we saw Rogers the musical originally in Hawkeye a couple years ago, and now they're making it into Rogers the musical, the motion picture, which is similar to Hamilton, which is another Disney property. So now we're seeing that in this world there are several movies about existing superheroes, whether it be the Avengers in Rogers the musical, or whether it be Wonder Man as Wonder Man or Simon Williams as Wonder Man, even though he is not Wonder Man. It's all just confusing, but there's precedent for it, and interesting to see how and if it all gets brought back up. And honestly, the Doorman was probably the most interesting character of the entire series. So I'm excited to see if he shows up again. But they landed the plane. We now have a superhero who is a movie star, and he's a movie star as a superhero in the MCU. And the epilogue is that he is so talented that he's able to use his acting skills to go not undercover, but in character to infiltrate damage control as a security guard, by endearing another security guard and, studying him and living with his family and trying to understand the nuances while promising that he's going to be a character that he's going to portray. And he breaks into damage control and he breaks out our good boy Trevor. So the two are reunited again. And this is how we're sent out. There are no post credits. There was Easter eggs, but outside of damage control and Trevor, I didn't catch very much connected to the outside world. There is a scene where they're in the director's house where he has his like vision board for the property, and there's some images of the Black Panther and of Captain America and some other stuff. Those are the ones that I've caught. I'm sure there were some others. But yeah, it's interesting to see where they go from here. I'll probably give it like a 9 out of 10. I really wish that they had talked more, if at all, about Trevor's time in Zenla. I thought that they just completely skipped that, which is weird because it seems like the director of this series was also the director of Shang-Chi. And this obviously was the last time we saw Trevor, but we'll see. I thought by the time that he turned himself in as the Mandarin and took responsibility, that was going to be his swan song and we would never see him again. But apparently he may not be done with the MCU. And it's cool if we have him exist similar to Darcy and to Jimmy Woo and to all these other secondary and tertiary characters that exist as, auxiliaries to these different franchises. So I think he's a great actor. I think whether he's the Mandarin or Trevor Slattery, I think it's very interesting. So I think it could be cool to see where that goes. So that was my assessment of season 1 of Wonder Man. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But we're not done yet. As part of every episode with Checkin the Gate, I wanted to be able to do a spotlight on independent Black television or film projects. And the synergy between the project that I chose this week and Wonder Man was crazy. Before watching Wonder Man last week, I decided to go and look for something to watch. I looked on Tubi, figured that would be the best place to watch some of the content that is going to be independent Black created content. And honestly, a lot of the stuff that I end up auditioning for and see more regularly is stuff that ends up on Tubi or Freevee or a bunch of these other platforms that are paying creators way more than the bigger streaming sites. So I wanted to make a point every week to find something that is not produced originally from Amazon or Apple or HBO or Peacock or Netflix. It can be on those platforms, but I wanted to find something that originally started off somewhere else. And so the show that I ended up picking was 2022's Send Help. And that show it originated on All Black, which is an imprint of AMC. And I originally watched it because it had the character of Jerome from Snowfall in it. And I thought it had the character of Jerome from Snowfall in it. And I thought that was interesting because he was someone who had done network television, had some visibility to him. So for him to do a series like this, I thought that it meant that it must have some kind of production value. And I was interested in seeing what that looked like, because I'm sure he wouldn't attach himself to something that was completely, unwatchable, as you see with some of the stuff on Tubi where there's just continuity issues out. That this wasn't that. It was actually really cool. It reminded me a lot of like Entourage. But the craziest part of it is the main character on this show, Send Help, which is, again, the 2022 version of it, not the movie that came out in 2026, which has nothing to do with it, which is a bunch of white people doing some other stuff. I'm talking about the television show, Send Help, which features a Haitian actor who actually is in Wonder Man, and he plays Terrell, the PA that works with Simon Williams in the last 2 episodes. And in this show, Send Help, his mother actually plays the character of Esther in the scene where they go back to Simon's house. Because Simon Williams also is Haitian in canonically Wonder Man. So there was a lot going on here. I don't know if there's any more formal overlap other than the fact that they're both Haitian and both shows are about actors, and that the lead of Send Help is also in Wonder Man. I don't know if he is also a part of the writing staff or not, but there was a lot going on there. But I gravitated towards it because I thought it would have good production value, but then also because I thought it would be a great way to talk about episode 1 of Checkin the Gate, keeping it about being a Black actor and what it's like to be in the industry. And so it added another meta text to it. So we had me as a Black actor watching a show about a superhero who was a Black actor, which had an actor on it who's from another show that I had also watched on my podcast about being a Black actor. And the show was about that guy being a Black actor. So I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of crazy. I don't know if that made sense. But anyway, that's what happened. And I thought it was very cool. And at the last episode of Send Help, Issa Rae is actually on it. So it actually, I think, goes to show how collaborative Black Hollywood can be. I'm sure it isn't always. But also, if you are looking, I think you can see people and they start to pop up more regularly. And then you start to see how they're connected. And I'm sure they all have stories. And he's probably done a bunch of stuff that I was unaware of before this. But I thought that was super cool. So that was this week's Spotlight. I'll do that every week. But outside of that, for me and the auditions that I did, I went to a screening for Amazon Prime's new movie, The Wrecking Crew. That was pretty awesome as well. That's the cool thing about Atlanta. There's a lot of acting, there's a lot of independent films. There's a lot of screenings that go on. There's a lot of screenings, there's a lot of premieres, and there's a lot of film groups. Atlanta Film Society, pre-production. There's a lot going on here. And so I went to this screening for this movie, Send Help, and it stars Jason Momoa, who is about to be Lobo in the new Supergirl, and Dave Bautista, and they are brothers. And the action in this was crazy. There was one highway scene where they're just like murking people left and right. There's one hallway scene that's shot in profile, super dope, where Batista is like kind of mowing down everybody while Riz is playing, but it's shot in profile, so you kind of only see him through the side of like a hallway. But it was really cool. The energy from the crowd coming out of it, everybody was like, oh, it's like Bad Boys, it's like Rush Hour. I don't know if it's quite on that level, but it is a very solid buddy cop, and they're brothers. They're obviously both physical actors, which I think is something that you don't normally have in buddy cops. Definitely not in Rush Hour and in Bad Boys, but the physicality of both these guys was top tier. And there's a lot of like explosions and gun stuff too. So it's not just about them, doing hand-to-hand combat, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I recommend that if you're looking for a watch on Amazon for a movie. If you're looking for some television to watch, I watched the complete season of Steel, which is also on Amazon Prime. If you're into crime, heist, financial shenanigans, cryptocurrency, Season 1 of Heist does all those things. It's a bit of a whodunit. It's a bit of cops and robbers. I don't want to spoil too much of it because if I said any more, I would. But it's definitely worth it. And if you like the Italian Job, if you like anything that is kind of even like Luther, if you're into those type of things, it takes place in England. But if you're into crime, into suspense, into mystery, but also into like heist, I highly recommend season 1 of Heist. And then I watched a bunch of stuff, but I watched season 4, episode 3 of Industry, and those motherfuckers are wild. If you're into Industry, you already know HBO has been pushing the fucking envelope since they did, Oz and Game of Thrones, and they keep doing stuff, but the sex scenes and like the ideas that they have and that they're willing to just do on camera, I feel like I'm prude now. I'm like, God damn, like, have I lived? But the shit that rich white people begin into is, I'm like, all right, cool. Like, I didn't know. I respect your game. I was unaware. But yeah. Anyway, Industry's back. Harper is being Harper. Raj and Sweet Pea got into some stuff. And we have kind of the new normal of what their world is going to be after Pier Point. There's a little bit more, I think, security in who the characters are and who's left and what their roles are. And so I'm excited to see where the rest of the season goes. But yeah, that pretty much has been me this week and what I've watched. Not all of it, but tune in next week. I'll go over what I watched more in depth. We won't be doing as long of a segment as I did, but I really wanted to talk about Wonder Man. So thank you guys all for watching, for being a part of episode 1 of Checkin the Gate. We looked back at the week in television, the week in film, the week in streaming, and we checked the gate. Everything's in focus. Everything's clear. There's no hair in the frame, and looks like the gate is clean. So we are going to say the gate is checked, and we are going to call that a wrap. We're going to send that off. And thank you all. Please like, subscribe, follow us on Instagram, on Twitter. It's Checkin the Gate. It's checking without the G. CheckinThegate. And that's at Instagram and at X. Is that what the kids call it? But this is the first episode. So you can be one of the first followers. I'm always looking for new suggestions on films to watch in general, movies to watch, television shows in general. But then also, if you have any recommendations for what I should talk about for my Black Indie Spotlight, I'm definitely looking for suggestions for those as well. So thank you guys for bearing with me, for being a part of the first episode of Checkin the Gate. I hope to hear from you soon. I hope you enjoyed the content. I hope you enjoyed Wonder Man. We got to go out there and we got to watch this stuff, because if we don't, they're going to say it's a flop and they're not going to make more stuff, and you're never going to get to see me play a superhero one day. So please go out there, support it, watch it, tell a friend.